Okay, so this is part 3. This is the Battle of Emesa, 272 AD. The battle name isn't as important as the year. Everyone knows that. But this is how Aurelian restored Rome, part 3. This is going to be a two-parter. Part 3 is going to be a two-parter. Yep. Gotta do it now.
In light of the Battle of Emesa, Zenobia arrived in Antioch with her own retinue to bolster morale. The unwelcome news that her heavily armored Clibanarii had been badly defeated by lighter units surely came as unexpected. Having lost some of their best cavalry and needing reinforcements, the Palmyrene position at Antioch had become untenable, and there was a real danger of encirclement if they chose to stay and fight. But a hasty retreat would have spread panic and could prompt the citizens to rise against the Palmyrenes in order to gain favor with the victor. Fearing betrayal by the people of Antioch, Zabdas employed a clever ruse to buy some time. He fabricated a victory at Emesa. To back up his claim, he found a man who resembled Aurelian in age and build, dressed him in clothes that looked somewhat imperial, and then paraded him in chains.
Gotta say that is pretty smart, but the downside is what happens when your people find out that you lied because their city is now under siege.
Through the city streets, giving off the impression that the Palmyrenes had not only won the battle, but had captured the Roman emperor alive. Their ruse, however, would only last for so long, as Aurelian's army would appear in front of the city walls in no more than a day. While the people enjoyed the procession and the subsequent celebrations, Zenobia and Zabdas made preparations to abandon the city. The following night they slipped out of Antioch under the cover of darkness and marshaled their army south to Emesa. Despite this setback, Queen Zenobia remained defiant. She still possessed cavalry reserves that far outnumbered those available to the enemy. Her army was more than capable of stopping Aurelian and turning the tide of the war. When the sun rose the next day, the citizens of Antioch were in for a rude awakening. Seeing that the Palmyrenes had retreated, many who had staunchly supported Zenobia feared reprisals from Aurelian. Some of the officials and aristocrats fled into the surrounding countryside. Meanwhile, the Roman emperor was encamped some 20 kilometers east of the city, still unaware that Zabdas had withdrawn his troops. Having dealt a blow to the enemy's heavy cavalry, Aurelian could now safely deploy his infantry against Antioch and send the cavalry around the city to encircle the Palmyrene position. It was only sometime after daybreak that he learned of Zenobia's complete withdrawal, and he marched to the city at once. This video is brought to you by our friends over at CuriosityStream. As their long-time subscriber, I recommend their history documentaries where you can find topics from Once at Antioch, Aurelian was met with opened gates and a warm reception. The city clearly tried to do everything not to provoke the emperor. For his part, Aurelian showed that he was not interested in retribution. Upon learning that some of the city's elites had fled in fear of reprisals, he issued a general pardon to all citizens of Antioch. But his political maneuvering didn't stop there. He published edicts far and wide, advertising to the people of Syria that he considered those who had collaborated with Zenobia to have done so under pressure rather than of their own free will, thus absolving them of any penalties. This calculated policy of clemency immediately had a desired effect. His troops were welcomed by the locals. Bartering for provisions brought business to local markets, craftsmen and shopkeepers. And, most importantly for the emperor's long-term planning, the wealthy elite that had fled Antioch returned to the city with gratitude.
I said it in part 1. I think I even said it in part 2. When you win over the people, you are securing, first off, you're securing your supply line. You've now gained new support by trade. It's so much easier to lure people in and show mercy than it is to just go through and kill. Just so much better.
Moreover, a march further into Syria would likely be met with much less hostility, and, crucially, the large fortified cities were now less likely to offer resistance, which would otherwise force Aurelian into prolonged and costly sieges.
You're also... The troops are hearing this, and the troops are probably starting to think, these troops are starting to think, we're guaranteed death. Because why would they save us? You know, he's going to massacre us because we're fighting against him. These troops are probably looking at it like, if we escape, we're going to be forgiven. Because we could always say that we were forced to do all this. Like, you know, you're going to be winning. Because, look, these people, they have their ears open. They know what's going on.
By embracing the wealthy Syrian aristocracy that opposed him, the emperor not only freed up troops that he needed for the war against Zenobia, but also secured the local logistical support for his army in Syria. However, Aurelian was detained at Antioch for a time due to administrative and military considerations. Years of Palmyrene rule, increasingly at odds with the central imperial government, brought about changes to the administration that needed to be addressed. First, at the fore of these issues was the imperial mint, which Aurelian temporarily closed. Second, the emperor dealt with the growing problem of the Christian schism by deposing Paul of Samosata, the divisive bishop of Antioch, who had received patronage from Zenobia. On the military side of things, a pressing issue was the Palmyrene garrison at Daphne, just south of Antioch, which had been left behind as a rearguard by Zabdas as he withdrew south. This contingent was unlikely to pose a threat, but its position above the strategic narrow gorges could hinder Aurelian's advance and inflict serious losses on his army. This made the Palmyrene contingent both impossible to ignore and difficult to dislodge. Aurelian opted for a full frontal assault with his infantry, who had yet to see action on the battlefield in the war against Palmyra. The legionaries formed the famed Testudo formation and attacked up the steep slopes, battling their way up the hill under a heavy rain of missiles, including darts and stones. With their shields closed together over their heads, Aurelian's infantry made the ascent without suffering heavy losses. And once atop the hill, they made short work of breaking through the enemy defenses. They put the Palmyrenes to flight in such disorder that some were driven over the cliff's edge and were dashed to pieces on the precipices below. Such a direct assault would have otherwise been considered reckless, but in contrast with his public show of clemency, Aurelian made sure to demonstrate to everyone his capability to deal swiftly with any dissent. The secondary military reason that delayed the emperor was reinforcements. Aurelian welcomed contingents from the recently retaken Tyana, as well as the various other towns of Cappadocia, all on their way to join the emperor's army. He deliberately waited to provoke defections of other Roman units in the east who abandoned Zenobia's cause and joined Aurelian. To the south, Marcus Aurelius Probus was similarly delayed while he welcomed defections of various military units from Phoenicia and Palestine.
So he's getting down there. That video will play. Oh, come on. Yes, I know. I'm gonna get YouTube Premium. I know. They're blocking all ad blockers.
At last ready to move south, Aurelian was received with open arms by the towns and villages along his itinerary, most notably the cities of Apamea, Larissa, and Arethusa. However, he soon came upon the army of Zenobia and Zabdas. Zabdas drew up the Palmyrene army on the plains north of Emesa, some 50,000 strong. His host was reinforced with large numbers of Clibanarii to replace those who had been lost in the previous encounter. And this time, the battlefield was of his own choosing, well suited for mailed heavy cavalry. Aurelian's ranks, meanwhile, had swelled as well. He had crossed into Asia with some 36,000 troops, but reinforcements from the newly conquered eastern provinces brought his army up to around 45,000. Both commanders stationed their cavalry on the flanks and infantry in the center. The Palmyrene cavalry arm was superior, not only because of their armor, but also their superior numbers. In addition to their Clibanarii, the Palmyrenes probably also employed elite Oceanian armored horse archers and Palmyra's local light cavalry and dromedary archer units. Again, the Roman emperor took the initiative. His infantry, interspersed with veterans from the campaigns against the Iatungi, Vandals and Goths, were tasked with breaking their counterparts. Meanwhile, he planned to keep the Palmyrene cavalry occupied. He feared that the superior numbers of the enemy cavalry would allow Zabdas to hit his infantry on the flanks. Marcellinus, one of his most trusted lieutenants, was to use his own cavalry to deter an envelopment through the use of non-committal tactics of harassment. If successful, the Clibanarii and Zenobia's other mounted units would not be able to commit to an envelopment of Aurelian's center, so long as the fast-moving Dalmatians and Moors were in a position to outmaneuver them and hit them on the flanks. But Zabdas had learned from his previous defeat. He ordered his heavy cavalry to advance on the enemy at a slower pace to give the impression that they would again fall into the trap of a feigned retreat. But they waited for the opportune moment when the enemy came in too close before charging at full gallop. The battle did not begin as Aurelian had hoped. He had ordered his mounted units to withdraw before the charge of the enemy and fight an evasive battle of harassment. But the Clibanarii pursued the Emperor's cavalry with such ferocity that they were unable to maintain their distance. Locked in close quarters fighting, and also facing ranged attacks from Zabdas's horse archers and dromedary archers, the Dalmatians and Moors were hard pressed, and many fell. But despite their troubles, they kept their discipline and successfully occupied Zenobia's cavalry, buying time for the infantry in the center. After facing down a Palmyrene rain of arrow fire, Aurelian's infantry charged the enemy formation, their momentum driving back Zabdas's center. However, the situation for the Dalmatians and Moors on the flanks was critical. What was supposed to be an orderly tactical withdrawal was close to becoming a rout. If their lines faltered, the whole army would quickly become surrounded. Aurelian decided to gamble. Seeing the trouble his cavalry were in, he detached infantry from the main line to wheel about and aid the embattled flanks. This action sapped the forward push of his units in the center, and Zabdas was immediately able to counter. Aurelian's veterans held firm, but the less experienced troops fared badly, their lines faltering against superior numbers of the Palmyrene infantry. But just as the battle seemed lost, Aurelian's gamble proved decisive. Zabdas's Clibanarii brought the full force of their charge upon Aurelian's cavalry. But in doing so, their own formation had fragmented into smaller groups as they made every effort to chase down the nimble riders. Aurelian's infantry exploited the gaps where the club-armed Palestinians were especially effective in the tight spaces. Their blunt weapons proved devastating against the heavily armored Palmyrene cavalrymen. Marcellinus rallied the cavalry and the Clibanarii began taking many casualties. Their formations held fast and repelled repeated attacks. But, overwhelmed and attacked from two sides, their numbers dwindled and the survivors fled the field. By this time in the center, Aurelian's infantry formation had stabilized and was...
So I tried to stop it just as I saw the white flags.
And attacked from two sides, their numbers dwindled and the survivors fled the field.
Okay, so we're going to pause it right there. The survivors are fleeting. They're fleeting the field. As we all know, that's the proper way to say it. Survivors are fleeting the field. Oh, I should be tied to the railroad tracks by a villain with a mustache that curls as he just goes, no, 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 and then a train just runs over me. I just can't speak English, apparently. All right, so enough about that. So there's a thanks button. You can donate to the channel. You don't have to. All donations are appreciated. Subscribe to the channel. Give a thumbs up. That helps on the other end of helping the channel with the algorithm. Gets the video out there. Gets people to know who I am so they'll want to see my videos. Keeps me wanting to make videos. And if you give a thumbs down, I have this really cool thing I call drowning you in a bathtub. It's not what it sounds like. We put you in a bathtub, and then we put our foot on the back of your head, and there's like 15 of us, and we just stand on you as we turn the bath water on. And you just drown in the bathtub because you can't get up. It's actually exactly how it sounds now that I say it out loud. So, you don't want that to happen, so just give a thumbs up. Or donate to the channel and then give a thumbs down. What? Don't do that. Until next time, which will be part 2 of part 3, which will be actually the 5th video of all. Have a good day, have a good night.